The wind cut across the frozen plain like a blade. Beneath the bruised sky, a group of early humans moved silently, wrapped in furs and instinct. The leader, a broad-shouldered man named Orek, crouched low behind a jagged boulder. His breath misted in the cold, his eyes fixed on the mammoth herd moving slowly through the snow. Beside him, the others waited, spears gripped tightly, hearts pounding with fear and purpose. They had followed these giants for days. The mammoths were not merely prey, they were forces of nature, lumbering monuments of muscle and memory. A single misstep, a single moment of hesitation, and a man could be trampled under tusks the length of a spear. But the tribe was hungry, and the mammoth's fall meant warmth, food, and survival. Orek raised his hand. The signal. Behind the boulder line, others crept into position, closing the circle. The plan was simple. Isolate the youngest one, drive it toward the ravine, and let gravity do the rest. No glory in this kind of kill, only necessity. Orek felt the weight of every life behind him. His son, barely 10 winters old, waited at the top of the ridge with the others, too young to fight but too old to be left behind. The wind shifted. The mammoth calf, smaller but still formidable, raised its trunk and let out a trumpet that echoed across the ice. The matriarch stomped once, then again, alert to the shift in air and sound. Orek tensed. It was now or never. With a guttural cry, he broke from cover, and the others followed. Spears flew, whistles cut the air, and the world turned to motion. The calf turned, bellowing, confused by the sudden chaos. As the adult mammoths formed a defensive wall, one flank broke slightly, just enough. The trap worked. The calf veered toward the ravine, uncertain, panicked. Orek's warriors shouted and pounded the earth behind it, hurting the creature with noise and movement. The ground trembled under their feet. The ravine came closer. A moment later, the calf tumbled over the edge, a sickening, thunderous crash following. Silence. Then, cheers erupted, low, ragged cries of victory. Orek stood still. He looked at the place where the mammoth had fallen, then to the sky. He felt no triumph, only relief. Far to the east, under a moonlit canopy, a different battle unfolded. Here, the jungle was humid and close, every breath thick with tension. The creature they hunted was unlike the mammoth. Crept, it watched. Its teeth were curved like daggers and eyes glinted with predatory fire. The saber-toothed cat was no legend, it was death on 4 legs. Tama, lithe and quick as a shadow, moved through the underbrush with her tribe. They had already lost one hunter, Kiro, dragged off in the night, his screams muffled by the beast's jaws. Now it was vengeance. But revenge was only useful if it fed the tribe. The trap was ingenious. A narrow canyon where the walls bent inward, forming a choke point. Tama's people smeared sharpened stakes with sap and waited in the trees above, nets coiled and ready. They had learned from watching other predators: ambush, patience, cooperation. When the cat appeared, its growl low and bone-deep, no one moved. It padded cautiously, sniffing the air, aware that something was wrong. But hunger drove it forward. The bait, fresh blood from a boar kill, was irresistible. As the cat stepped into the trap, Tama gave a short whistle. Nets dropped, arrows flew. The creature screamed, twisted, fought, but it was too late. Spears found flesh. The cat thrashed once more, then collapsed in silence. Tama climbed down slowly, approaching the fallen predator. Its eyes were still open, its mouth frozen in a final snarl. She knelt, placing a hand over its chest, feeling the last fading tremor of life. It was not hatred she felt, nor pride. Only understanding. One apex predator had bested another. The difference was that she had a tribe, and the cat had only claws. On the other side of the world, near a coastal marshland now lost to time, humans faced another behemoth, the ground sloth. Taller than any man, thick-skinned, and strangely docile, it moved with a sluggishness that belied its strength. But the changing climate had turned forests to fields, and cover became scarce. Food for these giants dwindled. The hunters, on the other hand, were growing smarter. Reno, young and eager, watched the creature with a mix of curiosity and calculation. It wasn't aggressive, not like the others, but it was food. He signaled to his companions and they formed a crescent, moving slow, careful not to startle it. They had learned that such creatures didn't understand fear. They didn't run, they endured. That was their weakness. One by one, the tribe hurled rocks, sharp and fast. The sloth raised its head in confusion, more puzzled than afraid. Then the first spear struck, not deeply, but enough to draw blood. The second followed, and the third. Reno moved closer, breathing hard, until he was within striking distance. The final blow was merciful. The beast slumped forward, massive body shaking the earth. Later, as the tribe worked to carve the creature, Reno sat beside its head, looking into the still face. It had died not with a roar, but with a whimper. He couldn't help but wonder if this was victory or something else. They had killed it, yes, but they were also watching an entire age fade. These creatures, once invincible in their time, were relics, outmatched not by strength, but by evolution's cruel hand. The fire crackled that night as stories were shared. Of Orek and the cliff, of Tama and the saber-cat, of Reno and the sloth. Each tale carried the same weight, survival through unity, through wit. They did not glorify the death, nor pretend the creatures they fought weren't worthy adversaries. Instead, they honored them. Each battle was a testament, not just to victory, but to the line between prey and predator blurring under the weight of necessity. And as the stars wheeled overhead, someone whispered of another beast. One with feathers and claws, wings like thunder, eyes like polished stone. It came from the skies, they said, once, but it too had fallen. Not to fire or trap, but to time. They did not know its name. Only that it was large and fierce and gone. The children listened wide-eyed, not out of fear, but wonder. And somewhere beyond the trees, a lone howl echoed across the land. The war was far from over. But tonight, the fire burned bright and humanity had won again. Smoke curled from the lips of the dragon's lair, thick with the scent of scorched earth and something older, ash from 100 villages, bones of the brave and foolish. The wind howled through the high cliffs, and the villagers below kept their eyes low, knowing too well what dwelled in the mountains above. But among them stood a boy with dirt-streaked skin and fists clenched so tightly his knuckles burned white. Eland was no hero. He had not been chosen by prophecy, nor born under an omen. His father had died feeding pigs, his mother sewing wool until her fingers bled. But when the dragon came and took their grain, their cattle, and finally their children, something in Eland refused to bend. While others hid, whispering prayers and clutching relics, he sharpened a rusted sword and stared into the flames as if willing them to part. That night, as elders debated appeasement once again, Eland slipped away into the dark. He did not believe in fate. He believed in fire and steel. The path to the mountain was littered with remains, shattered armor, splintered shields, bones bleached by sun and snow. No glory waited here. Only truth. Eland climbed without rest, hunger gnawing at his belly, sleep dragging at his limbs. But he pressed on, heart pulsing with a rhythm that matched the old stories, and man rose up from the dust, and with nothing but courage, he struck down the beast. Inside the cave, it was not the heat that startled him, but the silence. No roar. No shifting of titanic limbs. Just the slow, deliberate breath of something asleep yet ancient. The dragon lay coiled in the dark like a god dreaming of fire. Its scales shimmered like emerald glass, its wings furled tight against the stone. Eland stepped forward. His hand shook, not with fear, but awe. He had expected rage, maybe terror. Instead, he felt sorrow. This was not a monster, it was a remnant. A creature born when the world was young and unmeasured. And still, it had to die. He drew the sword. It sang, a sharp, ugly note in the hush. The dragon stirred, one golden eye snapping open. It regarded him not with wrath, but curiosity. Then it spoke, not with words, but with a presence that pressed into Eland's thoughts like a weight. "You are not the first," it said. "You will not be the last." "I don't care," Eland whispered. "I'm enough." The battle was swift, brutal. The sword shattered halfway through. Eland fought with flame licking his clothes, smoke searing his lungs, his body battered and bloodied. But in the end, he drove the broken blade into the creature's throat as it loomed above him, and the cave shook with its dying scream. The villagers never saw him again. But when they climbed the mountain weeks later, they found the dragon gone, the stones blackened with its blood, and in the center, a rusted hilt buried in rock like a monument. They sang of him after that, not as a chosen one, but as a reminder that fear ends when someone chooses to stand. Far across the sea, beneath waves deep and blue, another tale simmered in the minds of men. Captain Bryn of the whalers' vow stood at the bow of her ship, eyes fixed on the horizon where storm clouds brewed. Her hands, tattooed with faded stars and compass roses, tightened around the rail. For a week they had trailed the creature, first a wake too large for any whale, then shattered hulls bobbing in the surf, and now whispers among the crew. The Kraken. She did not believe in legends. She believed in what bled. The ocean boiled. A tentacle surfaced, thick as a mast, dripping with brine. It dragged across the deck like a curious finger. Men screamed. Cannon fire lit the night. But Bryn did not move. She waited until the creature rose, eye the size of her cabin door, and then she lit the fuse. They had loaded the hold with black powder, barrels stacked like a gambler's final bet. Bryn looked into the eye and for a moment felt the vastness of it. Not evil. Not anger. Just hunger. Just the sea wanting what it always had. Then the ship exploded. Days later, another vessel found Bryn clinging to driftwood, unconscious but alive. She never spoke of what she saw, but the attacks stopped. The Kraken, if it ever lived, was gone. Drowned in fire. And sailors still speak her name when lightning splits the sky. In the northern highlands, where the trees grow crooked and the wind smells of iron, a different threat haunted the villagers, one born not of sea or sky, but blood. The old ones called them skinwalkers, others said wolves that walked like men. They came with the moon, tore through cattle and children alike, then vanished into the hills. Father Marek had seen the signs before, claw marks on doors, the shredded linen of a nightgown in the snow, trails that ended mid-stride. He'd read the texts, hunted the damned. He knew silver was not just superstition. His latest assignment brought him to a village near the tree line, where fear outweighed faith. Each night, the people barred their homes and wept in silence. On the third night, it came. The creature was fast, black as night, its eyes gleaming with hunger. Marek was waiting with a blade baptized in rites long forgotten. He did not speak as it lunged, nor pray. He moved with the efficiency of a man who had killed monsters before. The blade bit deep. The creature shrieked, then collapsed, twitching in the snow. By dawn, the curse was broken. The villagers wept with relief. Marek stayed only long enough to burn the body and bury the blade. Then he vanished down the same path he'd come, already hunting the next shadow. These stories lived in whispers, carved into the corners of memory and firelight. But their message was clear. Humanity was not born to rule, nor to bow, but to resist. The monsters came in flesh and myth, claw and storm, but always they were met by someone who refused to die quietly. In the capital city of Altar, under marble halls and towering stained-glass windows, the scholars argued that myths were metaphors. Dragons were greed, krakens were the unknown, werewolves the savage self. But outside those halls, in villages and oceans and hills soaked in moonlight, the people knew better. They knew monsters. And they knew how to end them. Yet for all the victories, for all the blood and blade, something still lingered on the edge of every tale. A question unspoken. What if one day the creature does not lose? And in that silence the fire flickered. The wind that tore through the desert was dry and scalding, carrying with it whispers of vanished empires and half-buried bones. Dunes shifted like waves of gold, hiding and revealing secrets as the sun clawed its way across the sky. Among the dunes rode a solitary figure, cloaked in linen and silence, his eyes shaded by a visor of obsidian glass. His name was Colin, and he was searching for something not meant to be found. They called it the Sand Wurm. Not a beast of scales and wings, but a leviathan of the earth, long as a caravan, fast as a lightning strike, with a mouth full of rotating teeth and eyes like glassy rubies. It swallowed men, camels, whole wagons. Some claimed it didn't kill for hunger, but for ritual. That it was old when the pyramids were still blueprints in the minds of ancient kings. Colin didn't believe in rituals. He believed in vengeance. 10 years ago, the WRM had torn through his village in the dead of night, reducing homes to splinters and lives to dust. His father had been the village blacksmith, a man who forged blades for others but never carried one himself. When the ground split open and the sand turned to fire, Colin had been dragged into a cellar by his mother. When he emerged, he was alone. Now, armed with a harpoon reinforced with tempered steel and lined with an incendiary core, he followed the vibrations. The old ones had taught him to listen, not with his ears but with his feet. The earth trembled when the WRM stirred, like a giant shifting beneath a thin blanket. And today the tremble was near. He reached a ridge just as the sun dipped, casting long shadows across the land. Below, half buried in a crescent-shaped dune, lay the ruins of a forgotten temple, jagged spires, glyph-covered stones, and a central dais shaped like an open mouth. Colin dismounted and knelt, placing his palm against the sand. There, a low thrum, like a distant drumbeat, pulsed beneath his skin. The creature was circling. He moved quickly, planting the explosive stakes into the ground in a rough triangle. The temple ruins would serve as bait. Stone had resonance the WRM couldn't ignore. As night fell, Colin climbed to the top of the dais and waited, harpoon loaded, eyes locked on the horizon. The attack came with no warning. The ground heaved, a wall of sand rose like a tsunami, and the beast erupted from below, its mouth a spiral of hunger, its hide shimmering like burnished bronze. Colin leapt sideways, rolling across the stone, and fired. The harpoon struck true, embedding deep into the WRM's flank. The explosion that followed lit up the desert like a second sun, scattering flaming scales across the night. The beast writhed, smashing columns, howling a sound that had no right coming from any living thing. But it didn't die. It turned, wounded and furious, and lunged. Colin ran, not away but toward the ridge where the last stake waited. He triggered it remotely, another explosion erupting behind him. The WRM twisted midair, crashing to the earth with the force of a falling mountain. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then, with a final groan, the creature stopped moving. Colin approached slowly, harpoon drawn. The WRM's eye blinked once. He stood over its ruined face, heart pounding like a war drum. "I remember you," he whispered. "I remember everything." He plunged the final blade into its eye. No resistance, no scream, just stillness. By morning, the vultures circled, but none dared land. The sand held its breath. Colin mounted his horse and turned north, toward the mountains. Toward silence. He did not look back. Thousands of miles away, beneath the canopy of an uncharted rainforest, a different war was unfolding. The trees here reached the clouds, and light filtered down in speckled fragments, illuminating the forest floor like stained glass. Life moved in whispers. Frogs no bigger than thumbnails, snakes the color of shadow, plants that dripped poison like dew. And among them, something older than any map. The first team disappeared on the fourth day. Radio silence. Then the second team found only shredded tents and footprints that ended mid-stride. The jungle did not offer explanations. It swallowed them. Dr. Anya Velasquez stood at the edge of a moss-covered clearing, staring at a petrified idol half buried in vines. Her team was reduced to 5, nerves frayed, weapons always within reach. But Anya hadn't come for violence. She was an ethnobiologist, trained in both science and story. And the stories spoke of Itzcoatl, the guardian of the green deep. A bipedal predator, reptilian yet not quite dinosaur, feathers like quills down its back, and intelligence in its amber eyes. According to local legend, it hunted not for sustenance, but to preserve balance. Outsiders who disturbed sacred ground were considered violations. The jungle's immune response. The conflict was clear. The oil company financing the expedition had come to drill. Anya had come to understand. But time was running out. That night the creature came. The perimeter alarms triggered, but no one saw it. Only shapes between trees, flickers of movement, a whisper of breath on the neck. One by one, guards vanished into the dark. Anya stayed behind, alone in the observation tent, a recorder in hand, voice steady despite the chaos. "I am not your enemy," she said aloud, unsure who she was speaking to. "I didn't come to take. I came to listen." Silence. Then a shadow passed just outside the tent, massive, graceful, wrong in all the ways a predator should be. The zipper rustled. The flap lifted. Amber eyes stared into hers. And paused. They looked at each other for a full 5 seconds, 5 seconds that changed everything. There was no fear in the creature's gaze, only calculation. It lowered its head, almost in acknowledgement, then turned and vanished into the trees. By morning, the forest was calm. The remaining crew packed up and left without further loss. The company pulled funding. And Anya, when interviewed years later, would only say one thing. "Some things we are not meant to conquer." Her voice never shook when she said it. Back on the coastlines of a thawing tundra, in a village trapped between ice and myth, a child ran screaming into the elders' hall, shouting about a giant in the snow. Not a bear. Not a man. Something in between. The elders listened. They had heard the stories too. And they knew, when something forgotten wakes up, it always remembers who buried it. The fire in the hall burned low that night. And the shaman began to prepare. The waves whispered a warning long before the storm arrived. Fishermen in the coastal town of Selthorne muttered prayers beneath their breath, tying boats with trembling hands and shoving driftwood into doorframes to keep the sea from claiming what little they had left. Children were kept indoors. Nets were rolled tight. Even the gulls had gone quiet. But Lyra stood alone at the edge of the cliffs, her long coat flapping in the salt-thick wind, her eyes fixed on the horizon like she was waiting for something to rise from it. She wasn't wrong. For 3 nights now, the tide had behaved like a thing possessed, churning up fish with shattered bones and blackened eyes, hurling bits of twisted metal onto the shore, anchors warped like soft clay, barnacle-covered debris from ships no one remembered losing. Selthorne's people called it the maw, a thing from old sailors' songs sung only when the rum was heavy and the lamps were dim. A leviathan, ancient and without mercy, said to drag entire fleets beneath the water just to hear the mast scream. But Lyra didn't believe in old songs. She believed in her mother. And her mother had vanished at sea. The official story was weather, that worn-out explanation coastal towns lean on when they have no answers. Lyra had heard it 100 times. She must have been caught in a squall. But her mother, Captain Isolde, had commanded the Mural for over 20 years, through hurricanes, through pirate waters, through fogs thick enough to swallow stars. She didn't vanish. She didn't get caught. She faced things head-on. Like Lyra did now. The village council had already denied her request to take a vessel out. No one was fool enough to tempt the sea in times like this. But Lyra had never asked for permission. That night, under a sky inked black and slashed with lightning, she untethered one of the smaller cutters and slipped out of the harbor. No lantern. No sail. Just oars, resolve, and the whisper of her mother's voice carried on wind and memory. She rowed until Selthorne was a smear of lights swallowed by distance. The waves grew violent, as if the ocean itself resented her intrusion. But Lyra pressed on, soaked to the bone, her breath hitching with every thunderclap. And then, as the moon broke through the clouds in a brief silver gleam, the sea calmed. Dead calm. A vast shape breached the water in front of her, at first just a silhouette, then detail by terrible detail. The maw. Its head was sleek and long, like a serpent's, but with jaws that cracked open wider than any beast should be able to manage. Rows of teeth, jagged and infinite, churned like gears. Its eyes glowed faintly beneath the surface, bioluminescent and watching. Curious. A predator that had ruled these waters before names were given to land. And in its jaws, tangled in a shattered ship's remains, Lyra saw the hull of the Miral. Her heart clenched. Rage bloomed where fear should have rooted. She stood in the cutter, arms spread wide, shouting into the storm. "You took the wrong captain." The sea responded with a roar. The maw surged, water exploding upward as it launched toward her. But Lyra didn't retreat. She braced, triggering the harpoon rig she'd concealed beneath the floorboards. A single bolt, steel-tipped and humming with voltage, shot forward. It struck the creature's eye, not a killing blow, but a provocation. The scream it released split the sky in two. The ocean boiled as the maw vanished beneath it. The cutter spun, caught in the vortex of its rage, flung into the air like a child's toy. Lyra hit the water hard. Cold. Crushing. She fought the weight, the pull, the instinct to surrender. When she surfaced, clinging to a piece of wreckage, the creature was gone. So was the ship. So was her only chance at answers. A rescue vessel found her the next morning, adrift and frostbitten but alive. When they asked her what happened, she said nothing. Not then. But in her coat, sealed in waxed cloth, she carried the journal she'd found tangled in the wreck of the Miral, her mother's last log. The final entry was a single line. "It's not a monster. It's guarding something." Lyra knew then that her mother hadn't just vanished, she had discovered something buried deep in the ocean's forgotten veins. And the maw, terrible as it was, wasn't just killing for sport. It was defending. She'd be back. And this time, she wouldn't come alone. Thousands of miles away, in a land choked with snow and crowned by pine, another battle stirred, older than any storm, colder than any sea. Tomas Drecker had lived his whole life under the mountain's shadow. A logger's son turned hunter, he had tracked wolves through sleet and killed bears with nothing but a spear and instinct. But even he had learned to avoid the northern ridge when the snow turned red and the birds flew in reverse patterns. That was when the Wendigo walked. The creature was never seen. Only the aftermath. Bloodless corpses, eyes missing, footprints that stopped mid-stride in deep snow. Rumor said it once was a man, starved, cursed, or worse. Now it roamed in search of warmth it could never reclaim, feeding on fear more than flesh. When the Grant twins disappeared, Tomas didn't hesitate. He gathered rope, a hatchet, a silver-tipped bolt, and the bone amulet his grandmother had pressed into his palm before dying. "It hears hunger," she'd said. "So you must never starve in your soul." He didn't know what that meant. Not yet. The ridge was silent. Too silent. He followed the trail, crimson spatters against white snow, drag marks, a broken lantern still glowing faintly. Then, at the tree line, the stench hit him, rot mixed with frost like a graveyard buried in a glacier. He lit a flare and continued, each step deliberate, listening for the scrape, the breath, the sound of something that shouldn't be alive. He found the Wendigo crouched over a body, spine bowed, limbs impossibly long. It turned, not startled, but slow, like it had expected him. Its face wasn't a face. It shifted, constantly changing, like melted wax sculpted by cruel hand. Tomas aimed and fired. The bolt struck its chest, silver sizzling. The creature screamed, not in pain, but fury. It lunged. They fought in the snow, a blur of claw and steel. Tomas was fast, but it was faster. He slashed, ducked, rolled, bled. The bone amulet burned hot against his chest. And when he finally pinned it beneath him, pressing the hatchet into what might have been a throat, he saw in its eyes a flicker of recognition. Not fear. Not malice. Regret. Then it went still. By dawn, Tomas dragged the twins' bodies home. The village wept, thanked him, called him blessed. But he didn't feel victorious. Because as he burned the Wendigo's remains, the amulet cracked. And he realized it hadn't been a curse that created the creature. It had been hunger. The kind no food could fill. And somewhere in the ashes, something whispered his name. Not out loud, but from inside.